Hello, I am the Bristly Bear, and welcome to the Bear Games channel. Now, today I want to talk about what made me such an avid reader. And I'm not sure if all of you readers out there are books strictly readers, but books alone were not the thing that really made me interested in reading. And the thing that did was comic books. Now, I am going to talk today about comic books that made me the avid reader I am today, and three particular series that had a huge impact on my life in general. So hopefully you're interested in that and will join me and come and let's talk about some comic books. Now, let me first tell you about how I became interested in comic books in the first place. When I was about 8 years old, living in a very suburban neighborhood of Southern California, I happened to be riding my bike around one Sunday morning, and one of our neighbors about a block away was having a garage sale. I didn't know this woman very well. She was obviously an ex-Flower Power person from the decade previous, and I saw that she had everything spread out upon her lawn, and I asked, what's going on? Because I don't know if I'd even seen a garage sale or a yard sale previous to that. And she told me, and I said, is there anything I can do to help? And she said, sure, if you want to, this or this or this. Now, I started helping her set some things out and place some price tags, but I ran across a large box, and dumped into this box were a bunch of magazines that were very colorful. I had never seen anything like them before, and I started picking through them. And as I opened them up and looked at them, I became extremely interested. Now, this was a huge box of just loose comic books, and they were kind of a mix of mostly child comic books, ranging from things like Casper the Friendly Ghost and Little Lulu and Dot, the little girl who was obsessed with anything with dots, to Archie comics, which were a little more advanced than my age because they dealt a lot with interpersonal relationships in high school. And I sat down and I started going through these, became extremely engrossed in them. And I think I spent the rest of the day not helping her, unfortunately, but just sitting there and reading these comic books. At the end of the day, because it was Sunday and the weekend was ending, she was putting away anything that had not sold. She said, if you enjoyed those, do you want to just take them with you? And I was like, really? Sure. And she gave me the entire box of comic books, and I took them home. I read through those books avidly, and I did not stop. All of the ones that were appropriate for my age, and because they were there and I wanted to keep reading these books, I read the Archie comics as well. And although some of it was a little over my head, I was thoroughly into the adventures that they were having. So now, the reason that I say that this really made me an avid reader, and I didn't realize it until I was a little bit older, but something about reading those books caused me to read extremely quickly. And when I did pick up a book and was reading through it, I was flying through it in speeds that I never had before. I remember at the time there was a thing called Evelyn Wood's speed reading course, which supposedly taught you how to just read through a page of books just like this and flip and go through, which I have no idea whether that was actually a thing. But I can tell you that because I had read these comic books, I was reading at almost that speed. I would tear through a page in just seconds, much faster than I did before. And it was an interesting realization to make in lieu of the fact that I wasn't a huge book reader, and this made me want to be a huge book reader. I don't know what it was. I think maybe it's because you're reading such little snippets in comic books and you're quickly running through one chat bubble to the next chat bubble to the next chat bubble, which somehow made me read quicker when I pulled up an actual novel. So that is why I said that comic books have made me the avid reader I am today. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about 3 specific series of comic books that were responsible for pretty much impacting my life. We'll start first with the first juvenile comic that I got from that box that really, really drew me in and made me interested. And that was the Richie Rich comics. Now, Richie Rich, ironically called the Poor Little Rich Boy, for those of you who don't know, was a young boy about the age of 8, like I was, who belonged to an immensely wealthy family. We're talking can buy entire countries' wealth kind of family. And he had all kinds of little adventures and sometimes had to use his investigation skills to prevent thieves from stealing their fortune or all kinds of crazy things like that. And would just go on adventures all across the world and even into fantasy worlds and on science fiction adventures. He was accompanied by his little Dalmatian dog Dollar and often his butler Cadbury. And he even had arch villains that he would often go up against in his adventures. And he had lots of cameos in his books, which I was just thrilled by. In fact, Casper the Friendly Ghost and Wendy the Good Little Witch were people that did cameos in the Richie Rich comic books. And there was one person in particular that I always enjoyed when I found a story that involved him. He was Jackie Jokers, which was a young kid about Richie Rich's age who was a worldwide performer, and he was a magician, and he would do singing, and he was just a troubadour about the world. Yeah, how that happened at 8 years old, I don't know, but you just accepted it. But whenever Jackie Jokers came on, you knew that the story was going to be a parody of something in pop culture then, such as Indiana Jones or something like that. And they would go on an adventure that was just like that. And it was really thrilling to see that interpretation of it in a very humorous manner, because Jackie Jokers was, of course, someone that was always joking and made lots of puns and jokes about everything. So it was always very funny. It was always usually went from one issue to the next, or had varying chapters with cliffhangers in between chapters. So I always enjoyed when Jackie Jokers would appear with Richie Rich. Now, the reason I bring up Richie Rich and his series as one of the 3 comics that have really impacted my life is because this was the one comic that I was completely obsessed and avid about reading. Whenever I would go into town, go to the barber shop, and they had their comics on the rack, I was always trying to get Richie Rich comics because I really enjoyed the stories that came from them. So my first series of comics was Richie Rich, the Poor Little Rich Boy. Let me just take a quick moment to say I really appreciate you coming to my channel and listening. I really would appreciate it also if you would subscribe to my channel and like this video. I am really desperately trying to get to 1,000 subscribers so that I can start doing other types of content on YouTube. So please, 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 if you enjoy my channel and have enjoyed my videos, please take a moment and subscribe and help me get to that so that I can continue making these type of videos and getting them to a larger audience. Now, back to the books. Now, the second series of comics represented something of an evolution in me of what type of comics I was going to be reading. One of those times that I went in to get comic books in town, I ran across something that looked like this. And it's what they called digests, which at the time were collected editions of a book that were made in a much smaller printing format, but were printed so that you had entire runs of stories all in one book. This one was extremely colorful and was very evocative to me, and I thought, well, I'm going to give this a try. And this is the actual one that I bought when I was, probably 10 or 11. And it was Doctor Strange. And Doctor Strange represented to me an entire new level of ideas and introduced to me characters that I could never have imagined myself. And now, it started in 1963, or at least his first stories were in 1963, and done by Stan Lee and an artist named Steve Ditko. And the artistry of Steve Ditko is something that is legendary. It was very much controversial at the time because it was extremely psychedelic. Doctor Strange traveled in between universes and went on mind-bending adventures, and some of the settings that he went into were simply something out of what seemed like an acid or mushroom fueled dream. So there was a lot of controversy about it because people that were square were saying that it was promoting the whole hippie drug culture, when, of course, the writers insisted that they didn't do drugs at all. But there are all kinds of examples and pulls from Ditko's artwork that people have copied or tried to copy over the years. And in fact, you see some of it in even some of the current Marvel movies that have come out. Now, Doctor Strange was the sorcerer supreme of our universe, meaning that he was the one that was responsible for protecting our universe from otherworldly and cosmic threats. That fascinated me, and it was extremely enjoyable to watch him go through his adventures and go up against his villains like Baron Mordo and Dormammu, the other dimensional ruler. And I, who was personally interested in magic and sorcery, and was very much at that time reading the fantasy books that I've talked about on this show previously, was also very, very into the idea of a character who was like this. So I would have to say that it really transitioned me into a whole new level of books and started me on reading other superhero books, which of course led to things like the X-Men or the Avengers, and also the Justice League and a lot of the DC books that I enjoy as well. So definitely the second one on my list, one that has propelled me into the type of comics that I collected very much for many decades as a young adult, was Doctor Strange, the Sorcerer Supreme, Master of the Mystic Arts. Now, the third series for me to discuss with you today had a huge impact not only on me, but on comic books in general. Because once this book was written, it reverberated throughout the comic book writing universe, and still does to this day. And that is because it is not just a collection of stories. It was literally an art form. And that series, I should say, is The Sandman by Neil Gaiman. I know you're familiar with Neil Gaiman. I'm sure you've read some of his books. But he started, before those books, there were his comics. And this comic was astounding. Now, when I say that it was an artistry, I don't necessarily mean the art itself, which, frankly, when it started was not my favorite part of the book, because it tried to deliberately mimic some of the old comics like House of Mystery and some of the old terror comics from back then, which were, to me, very crudely written. crudely drawn, I should say. But what fascinated me was the story, which contained ideals that I just could never have come up with in my wildest dreams. And in typical Neil Gaiman fashion, if you've ever read Neil Gaiman, you'll know that he just looks at things a little bit differently than most people do. And he can just completely sideswipe you with an idea that makes you go, holy, I would have never thought of that. So, The Sandman was a story about an anthropomorphic ideal of humanity that was the person who controls our dreams, who crafts them for us to have when we sleep, and by extension is also has a purview of all stories that have ever been thought of or told. Now, he is called Morpheus, or Dream of the Endless, and the Endless are him and his brothers and sisters, all of them ideals that impact humanity, including death, destiny, desire, despair, and some others I don't want to mention, because if you're watching the current adaptations on TV, there could be some spoilers there. But this one followed most specifically Dream of the Endless, who was trapped back in the 60s by a contemporary sorcerer of Aleister Crowley, who was attempting to summon and capture death, which is Dream's oldest sibling. And they messed up the ritual, and instead of getting death, they ended up capturing Dream. And they kept Dream imprisoned for, I want to say, almost 100 years. And in the meantime, it was wreaking havoc all across the world with the fact that he was no longer in control of the dream country that he was the king of. And he was no longer the one crafting dreams. And it was just pretty much wreaking havoc across the world, as well as having reverberations throughout his own personal life. So it is the story of his capture and his subsequent escape and the things that happened to him after that escape. Now, this book, it won so many awards, and it just created a whole new level for comics to be at. And we would not have the comics with the sophistication and maturity that we do today without this book. So it was amazing to read, and it was amazing to be there as it was coming out and experiencing this entire change to the genre of comic books. I had never read anything that excited me so much, that made me want to run out and tell other people about it and say, you have got to read this. This is amazing. It has the story that blah, 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 blah. And I don't want to spoil anything for you, but I do want to say to you that if you are someone who only reads novels and has never picked up a comic book and kind of has looked down on them as a lower form of literature, you have got to get this book. You need to read this book, and you will be changed, because it is an amazing story. The artwork certainly gets better. I appreciated that. And it has had so many spin-offs. And in fact, Dream of the Endless has even appeared in a lot of other DC comics. A lot of people don't realize this, but he has literally appeared in the Justice League. He has had impact on superhero characters in numerous ways throughout the decades since this book came out, because Dream of the Endless and his siblings are part of that universe, of the whole DC universe. And it is really interesting to see. So I have got to say to you, if you are not a comic book reader, please, please, please go pick up this book and read it, and you will be changed, because you will realize that comics are now such an art form and can just be amazing. So it changed me and it changed comics forever, and that is The Sandman by Neil Gaiman. Okay, and with that, I have introduced to you the 3 comic books that have had the most impact on my life. And I hope that you enjoyed listening to them. And I hope if you're not a comic book reader, this may have gotten you a little bit interested in becoming one, or at least giving it a try. So don't let just books alone be where you stop, because there are other art forms out there that are well worth checking out. So thank you for coming to my channel. Please like and subscribe if you have not, and I look forward to speaking with you in the next video. Thanks again.